This is Iris Martinez, an interviewer for the Iowa State University Special Collections and University Archives Voices of a Pandemic Oral History Project. Today is Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. I am interviewing Caleb Knutson from Ames, Iowa, while he is in Radcliffe, Iowa. Please note, Caleb, that this interview will be placed in the Iowa State University Library and shared with Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Okay. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting to a few questions. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Parks Library at Iowa State University. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. So the first question is, do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Parks Library?
I do.
Okay. Second question, do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes.
Okay. And last question, third question, do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yeah.
Okay. We have many questions in a pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server before we send it to the Parks Library. We would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that would not be a part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Parks Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Parks Library?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And last question, on occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone number or email with journalists?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we'll get into some of the questions that we have for you. So let's start off by you telling me a little bit about your COVID experience.
I was pretty fortunate and privileged during the pandemic to not lose my job. I'm very thankful for that. The same for my wife. So we were very privileged in that, working for local government, working in an office, we were able to shift. We were able to pivot and be able to telecommute. So that was a positive. That was something that I know a lot of families struggle with, especially in the Latino community, that they weren't able to do that. And so I'm very thankful for that. Although we weren't able to telecommute, my wife and I, we are not teachers by training. And so schooling a 9, 10-year-old, a 7, 8-year-old, and a preschooler is not something that we have any experience in, have any training in. So that was hard because when the pandemic started, our kids were on spring break, or actually they were let out for early before spring break. So it was, okay, we're going to let you out a week before spring break and we'll see what happens after spring break. And so, they had the week off before spring break and then spring break, and then times and things just kept getting pushed into the future of when they would go into person. And so the school that they were in didn't give a whole lot of direction. And so that was very frustrating as a parent and someone who wants and values education for our kids. But like I said, we are not teachers. We are not trained to be teachers. In grad school, I avoided TAing because that's just not in my personality. I just don't have that. And I don't want to speak for my wife, but I think she's in the same boat. And so teaching elementary school kids wasn't easy, but I'm glad they weren't high schoolers. I'm glad I didn't have to help them through, trigonometry or basically any math past 7th grade.
Yeah, especially when it comes out of nowhere, like you just, now we got to do it kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a huge challenge for us as a family. And, once again, we were privileged. We had internet. We had quality internet for the kids, and that wasn't a worry. I remember seeing on the news the 2 young Latinas sitting outside of Taco Bell on their laptops, tablets, doing their schoolwork, and that just broke my heart because the pandemic didn't highlight the inadequacies that our community faces. I mean, people in the community, they know what's going on, but it highlighted to the majority what underprivileged, what vulnerable populations are facing on a daily basis and then you throw in a global pandemic. And that was hard, watching that go on, watching that. And so that was something that weighed heavy on me and a few other community activists as well. And a group got together and started the Spanish helpline, volunteers. I mean, my Spanish is so bad, I would not even claim to speak it, but, it was all volunteers to begin with. And so that was really important to me as a community leader, as a community activist, is making sure that our community doesn't get left behind because Governor Reynolds, her press conferences, the daily information, that wasn't coming out in English or in Spanish. It was only English. And I can't imagine having to translate that, for your family members to explain it because those are jargon. That's work words. Those are not words in everyday language. And so a group of amazing Latinos got together and started the Spanish Helpline, which was basically you call and they would figure out how to help you and send you in the right direction.
That's amazing.
Also, during the pandemic, I mentioned that there wasn't translation. The Department of Human Rights got together with PBS Iowa to get translation of the governor's press conferences because, you're basically playing the game telephone. When you hear it, you translate it and you give it to someone else and it goes down the line. And so ensuring that people are getting the information at the source is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, that just shows in this state of Iowa that if you don't speak English, if English isn't your dominant language, that you're going to be left behind. And that's okay by some officials. And that it really shouldn't be like that. Latinos shouldn't be left behind just because English is their second language. It's you see those memes online. It's like what's okay for rich people to do, but not okay for poor people. And one of them is speak multiple languages. And as ridiculous as that meme is, it's really true.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when people are dual lingo or bilingual and multilingual, they should be applauded for being able to know two languages and not, well, they should learn English. Yes, English is important to learn. I'm not going to say it's not, but we shouldn't shame an entire ethnic group, an entire community because their English proficiency isn't great. I mean, where is the point? Where's the grace in that?
Exactly. Yes.
And so during the pandemic, it was frustrating and hard to see all these community issues brought to light that people have been talking about forever. But at the same time, it was an opportunity for a lot of community activists to say, okay, this needs to be addressed. And Iowa's a pretty good state. I'm not going to say it's the best, but it has a lot of work to do when it comes to, not just with Spanish speakers, with many of the other immigrant populations. Iowa is a home and a place for many refugees, many immigrants. You look at cities like Marshalltown, Storm Lake, Perry, Ottumwa, any community with a meatpacking plant, those communities have high populations of immigrants and refugees. And those communities should not be ignored. Those population numbers shouldn't be ignored just because English is their second language. Yeah, you can have that. It's just unacceptable. And I think for the first time, the majority of the people, the privileged, were seeing how disproportionately affected people are in the state.
Yes. So like a lot of issues were brought to light.
And then, back to our family during the summer, our school, the school we enroll our kids in, was not releasing information fast enough for us. And so my wife and I, we had a long conversation and decided to pull our kids and put our kids into a online public charter school for the school year because we didn't know what safety precautions, what mitigation the school was going to do. And that wasn't an easy decision. because the schooling was all online. And I cannot emphasize enough, we are not teachers. We respect the teachers, pay them more, but with my parents being the child care while my wife and I are at work, we didn't want to put them at risk because the school wasn't. So we made the leap and did all online. The first month was not easy. But after everyone got in a groove, the online public charter school was successful. Now, you know, doing a charter school is not ideal, but it was a public charter school, so that gave me a little relief on the equity side. I am not a fan of private schools. I'm not a fan of charter schools, but knowing that this was an online public charter school helped alleviate some of my concern. And talking to a dear friend of mine who's a who is a school counselor at Roosevelt, she had nothing but positive things to say about Iowa Connections Academy, and the year was really positive for our kids. Our oldest son, who is 10 now, his anxiety wasn't as high as it was if he would have been in school, and so that highlights to me too issues that the youth have and deal with on a daily basis. And so while we didn't suffer loss of jobs, loss of income, we did have stress, but I don't ever want to take away from the story of Latinos who went through it. Um, and I hope that when we come out of this pandemic, that people will see that Spanish speakers, people who are English proficient, that they're incredibly important to their communities. Like I said, if you look at any of these communities that have a JBS, a Tyson's plant, they're going to be 20, 30, 40% Latino.
Mm-hmm.
And what that says to me is that these families move here, they build grocery stores, they build bodegas, they build restaurants, they pay taxes, and they are making it so that the school can do an addition. And just because that they're from a different country, their last name might have some Z's, or the L's don't, or the J's sound different, doesn't mean they're any less. And that's something I really hope to see. And if I'm honest, I don't know that we will. In Marshalltown, it's 29.9% Latino. We have 5 Latino grocery stores, 13 restaurants that are Mexican or Central American. And so that's economy drivers right there. And I think people need to recognize that these immigrants, they're not just essential workers, they're essential residents. And that's important to me, a story to tell, is these people are contributing to their community in a positive way. Because the Anglos kids, they're leaving, they're going to college, they're not wanting to move back. But yet the migrants, the immigrants, the refugees, they're coming, they're staying, and it's telling their kids that we see you. I was just talking to a friend last week, and she is a planner in Sioux City, and she's moving to Texas. She was a young Latina, and that kills me that she doesn't see her future for herself here. And that's something I want to happen. Is I want my kids to see themselves represented. I want Latino kids to know that they have a place in this state. And it's not always easy, it's not always pretty, but I really hope people can start to learn how much of an asset all immigrant populations are for the community that they live in.
Yes. Especially when the nation's going through a crisis, it really shows like the priorities that the governments have, and sometimes it doesn't side with the minority groups.
No.
That's a really good point that you brought up. Especially the way the information was coming out, I feel like minorities might have been a little more scared because they didn't realize what was going on, wasn't in their language. Everything was translated through maybe their kids. It's a really great point.
Yeah, and that's something too that you brought up, is the information, and people were scared, and that's something that the Iowa Commission of Latino Affairs, we really worked hard on, is getting accurate information out. The commission set up a Q&A with a couple Latino doctors from the University of Iowa, where they just dispelled information. And I remember talking to one of the doctors, and he made the joke that his dad was one of the biggest spreaders of misinformation. And this guy is a doctor at the University of Iowa, who is in it. And so I think it's important that we always talk about representation. If we don't see people like us, people who sound like us, people who have names like us, then it's going to be hard for us to believe. And I don't think people really get how important representation is. When you see a doctor who looks like you, who has an accent like you, who had similar experiences, who has a similar culture, who has similar food, and they're saying X, Y, and Z is okay, that's comfort. And so that's something that, always needs to be addressed, is understanding how important representation is.
Yes, for sure. So, how did you first learn about COVID-19?
So I remember hearing it on the news in, December, January, February. And it's kind of a funny story, is at our Super Bowl party, we were talking about it. One of our friends was like, "Oh, it's no big deal. It's just like the flu." And I remember thinking, okay, one of our mutual friends is a researcher at Iowa State, and he's going off. He's posting every day, every half hour, every just like how serious this is. And I said, we know this guy. We grew up with him, and if he's saying it's a big deal, and he's a scientist, I don't know why we wouldn't believe it.
Mhm.
And so I always think back to that conversation at our Super Bowl party, how we were all talking of, is this going to be a big deal? I remember thinking, if Adam is concerned about it and he's a scientist at ISU, then I should probably be too.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember hearing from family members who work at the Pentagon who said, you know what, this is the big thing. This is going to be big. And the Pentagon suggested to the president that he shut down the country for a couple of weeks. And so he's like, get a couple of weeks worth of food. So my wife and I went out and we bought, extra food for a lockdown. The lockdown never happened. But it was just one of those things that I wish our governor and the president at the time would have believed in science and not magic.
100%. So that kind of answers my question, your initial reaction to the information about COVID. So like what point or like what time period did you realize that this was serious? Like after, like right at that moment, or?
Well, so, um, I'm not a scientist and I tend to believe scientists. We had booked a weekend trip to the Great Wolf Lodge in Minneapolis. And we were waiting to figure out what we were going to do, and this was during the kids' spring break. And they kept saying that it was fine, it was no big deal, and we went. And basically, when we checked out that Monday or Sunday or whatever day it was, that's when Minneapolis and Minnesota shut down. And
Right.
our drive home, we stopped to get a couple of groceries in the gosh, what's the suburb? Blooming something suburb in the cities, Twin Cities, and it was wiped out. Everything was wiped out, and my wife and I, Angelia, were like, "Oh my gosh, this shit is getting real." All frozen food was gone, all meat was gone. We joked that the only stuff that was left on the shelves were the organic or vegan food. And on our drive home, I just remember thinking, okay, this is really real. It's really hitting the Midwest because people in Minneapolis are concerned, and that's only 2.5 hours from us.
Yeah.
And like I said, we had groceries. We had done a little bit of shopping from, a family member gave us a heads up, and then get home and go to work. And at work, telecommuting was not allowed. When I got hired, I asked about telecommuting, like, oh no, we don't do that. And then after probably 2.5, 3 weeks into the pandemic, they're like, okay, you guys can telecommute. And so that was something that was ironic and
Yep.
slightly humorous, is that realized that they needed to be mobile, that we weren't supposed to be in the office. And, that's when it hit coworkers.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this, but how did it impact your family members or your neighbors? The daily impacts.
Well, it was something that, how do you talk to children about this? You don't want to, I don't ever want to lie to my kids, but I don't want them to be scared. And so it was having open and honest conversation. It was making sure that we were watching PBS NewsHour and listening to NPR, making sure that we were getting unbiased news and, dialoguing with the kids. They might be able to tell you differently. And something that we were fearful of is, okay, what happens if we get it? Um, and I was pretty fortunate enough through one of the stimulus is that we got 2 free weeks of COVID sick time, or no, 10 weeks or something like that.
Okay.
And so if we got COVID, we wouldn't have to use our personal sick time. And so that was a big help, knowing that if I got it, I wouldn't burn through all my sick time. And at the same time, they were talking about the vaccine trials, and a colleague of mine was asking if I was going to do it. And I remember thinking to myself, well, why wouldn't I do it? I mean, they have no representation from the Latino community. If I sign up and they accept me into the program, there's a 95% chance that they'll give me the vaccine early. And if it works, wonderful, fantastic. And if it doesn't work, no big deal, no sweat off my back. And so I enrolled in the vaccine trial
Wow.
and did it. And it's not because I'm a good person. It's because I understood the statistics and the numbers behind it. Like I said, I knew that there was a very low chance that they'd give me the placebo. And if I had the vaccine, I would be able to, at least in theory, in our family, if my wife and kids got it, that I would be okay, that I could continue to work, that I could help my wife at the coffee shop if it really hit the fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I enrolled. And when they unblinded us in late December, early January, I did get the vaccine. So I got my second shot in late October.
Wow.
And so, you know, I can't emphasize enough that I didn't do it because I was a good person. I did it because I knew that they would give it to me and that I would beat the rush. And I did. And so knowing that I was safe gave a little ease, being the quote unquote breadwinner in the house,
Yeah.
because if my wife got it, that would be pretty bad. If my kids got it, it would be pretty terrible. But if I got it, financially, we'd be okay.
Of course, yes.
Um, and having elderly parents, a sick dad, that's something that really really weighed in, and which is why we also wanted to keep our kids home. Um, and making sure that they had the information to know that the vaccine isn't safe. It's not ground up baby fetuses, or it's not filled with God knows what, or it's not the government tracking you. And so wanting your family to have good information was really important, and wanting everyone to have good information, but especially the family members.
Yeah. Wow. So that's an interesting. You were in a part of the vaccine trials. That's really interesting. Um. So how did it? How? What kind of concerns or questions about healthcare had emerged, like as a result of COVID?
Well, for us, it was, I have a good job, I have good benefits. It was before the stimulus packages and before the rescue plans for businesses and local government. Is, if I get it, will I have to burn through all my sick time? And what does that mean for the regular go to the doctor? What does that mean for your kids sick? What does that mean for when I'm sick? And so that was a huge sigh of relief when we found out that we were given the free not vacation, the free sick time. Now there were people at work who would take advantage of it, because if you had a kid at home, you could use the COVID time off for childcare, but you'd only get three quarters pay. So you had to come in 1 day a week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there was time during the height of pandemic during last summer where I would telecommute Monday, Tuesday, and I would do childcare for our kids Thursday, and I'd go into the office on Friday. And it became a struggle. Um, and just the work dynamics of when an organization has never been allowed to telecommute, figuring things out on the
Yeah.
fly.
Oh yeah.
Um, we have the we had the technology to transfer all of our calls and clone our phones to be my office number,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't figure that out until last fall. But we had that technology all along.
Okay.
We just never needed it,
Yeah.
and it was stressful. But once again, I cannot reiterate enough, it wasn't as hard for us as it was other families. We were very, and we are very fortunate. No one in our immediate family died from the pandemic. Um, I'm thankful for that. But
It was hard.
yeah, it was a unique year.
Yeah. Yes. So about that, like, did you feel like you or your family went through any like mental health impacts or challenges?
you know, I I think for me the stress um, was from my volunteering side, being a part of the Iowa Commission of Latino Affairs, was seeing how the community as a whole was suffering.
Okay.
And that was hard for me. And then knowing too that I was not struggling like they were, that was difficult. Um, and then for my wife, there were times where I'd come home from work or it'd be in the evening and she just need to go be by herself because she had been working, she had been doing the child care, she had been doing teaching, and it was a lot. And I like to think that I am a good spouse,
Mm-hmm.
but I really learned that I could pick up the slack a lot more. Because on Monday through Friday, I'm gone from 7 until 5:50, 5:45, and there are three tiny humans who are needing nutrients, who are needing all these things so they can grow and be successful. And my wife and I are used to them being at school, and then when they're not, that's a lot. I'm not a teacher for a reason.
So, what kind of challenges did your children face as they moved to online model of education, or just being at home all the time?
Well, when you're at home all the time with people, there are personal conflicts, there are fights, and it's learning how to deal with those things. Um, I think our kids thrived in online school once they got the swing of it. Once they knew that this was the new normal,
Mm-hmm.
once they figured it out, they were good to go. But the learning curve was steep because they'd never done it. We'd never done it. The country had never done it. Um, and I don't want to call it homeschooling, but it was pandemic schooling. It was, oh, your kids need this, this, and this. And that was a concern of mine, is, are they getting the adequate education that they need to? Because we're in a global economy, and if our kids fall behind, that is not good. And so my wife and I, we would have them read extra. We would buy workbooks for them to do extra work because I was scared, and I still am scared, that they're going to be behind when they go to school next fall. And that was always my biggest concern: is this online? Is it enough? Now, we weren't the type of parents who were like, oh, this is child abuse. kids can't do this. They need to be in school. Ideally, yes, all kids should be in school. My personal opinion, all kids should be in public school. Um, but when there's a global pandemic, you've got to be flexible,
Yeah.
and that's something that we really wanted our kids to learn is is that you've always got to be flexible. You never know what's going to happen. And I think about 2020, and it was a shit show. We had the pandemic, we had George Floyd, we had the derecho,
So
and
disasters here and there around the world.
yeah, uh, you know, and just one of those things in a year would have been hard. But when you look back at 2020, all three of those things was very stressful.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, um, we didn't lose our jobs. Our kids stayed healthy. We were nervous at times. Our tensions ran high in the house, but we were okay.
That's good to hear. So I know we talked a little bit about the schools there where you live, but did the schools help your community during COVID-19 at all? Did they distribute food maybe or give like student accommodations?
I don't know if they did or didn't. Since we were online and open enrolled out of the school our kids go to, I hope so, but I don't know if they did.
Okay. Um, so do you want to tell us a little bit about your organizations that you've already talked about a little more, like how they provided resources regarding COVID-19?
I would love to. So I am fortunate enough, or they foolishly elected me chair of the Iowa Commission of Latino Affairs. We are a governor appointed board who we're supposed to inform the governor on policy recommendations and connect the governor to the community. The governor has not ever met with the commission. We have tried, she doesn't. We send her policy recommendations. Well, I don't even know what she does with them if she even looks at them. So during the pandemic, we already knew that the governor didn't care. I'm just gonna say I don't really care. Um, and so working with different organizations, working with Embark, starting a Spanish helpline, setting up the the Q&A with the two doctors from Iowa City. My heart was, and I can only speak for myself, is I want to get information out to the community. I want to make sure the community has the best information possible so they can make they can make adequate decisions. Because it's unfair for kids to translate for their parents, especially when it comes to legal documents or medical.
Oh yeah.
I cannot imagine that. And the kids who do that, they deserve an award. Like, just give them college for free. Um, and so that was a big driver behind some of our efforts, was to make sure our community was getting the good information and the correct information at the time, because information was constantly changing. Numbers were always, you know numbers were a huge part of it, and if you don't understand what the numbers mean, it's really easy to ignore them.
Yeah.
um and LULAC did a lot of good stuff. I love LULAC in Iowa. Nick Salazar, he's amazing. And they did a lot of good. And so it, it was coalition building. It was working with the coalitions that we had already built and finding new ones and reaching out to make sure our community did not fall further behind.
That's great. That's amazing. So I know you're already like hand in hand. You're right there with the politics here in Iowa. So how do you think politics affected how COVID was handled?
So this is a funny thing. Well, none of this is funny. My wife is originally from Oregon, and their governor, man, I would trade our governor for their governor in a second. I think what she did was great. She locked them down. She did all this stuff, and people hated her there because she was so strict on the lockdowns. Where Governor Reynolds was like, "Oh, it's no big deal." Joni Ernst said in a press conference that doctors are inflating COVID numbers to get paid more. And then she was the first in line to get the vaccine. So what does that tell you? I remember President Obama joking on the COVID telethon or whatever it was that if you see the rich white people getting the vaccine, you know you need to. And so it's one of those things is that they downplayed the pandemic. They put money and the economy before people, and that should not happen. And that highlighted the inadequacies of payment and inadequacies of healthcare, inadequacies of benefits many Iowans and people face in the United States. If you've got good pay and good benefits, you were fine. And that's where we fell on that. But if you didn't, you were in a world of trouble. It was evident that you had to make the choice if you were sick to go to work or to stay home. Because if you missed work, you could be fired, but you couldn't miss out on that paycheck. And it shouldn't be that way. People shouldn't have to go to work if they're sick.
Oh yeah.
Because it reduces production, it reduces other people because they will get sick too. And so the politics here they're just bogus. Um, putting JBS, putting Tyson interest before the interest of human lives is not important. Where are these people? These people call themselves pro-life. They're not pro-life.
I agree with you.
Sorry, I get really frustrated with
No,
this,
I
the
love
whole
it.
politics
No, that's
of Iowa
exactly
during
what
the
I want to
pandemic.
hear from you, and I want to hear we want to hear all the sides of the stories that come from the Latinos that are not heard enough. And your
No.
story, it makes me want to start talking about that kind of thing because I feel just as your passion, I feel that 100%. Um,
Well, if you stay in Iowa, I will connect you to organizations.
that would be amazing. We would love that. If you want to link us to those things, send it to us, and we will put it out there for people to see.
No,
So how do you think like the United States like handled COVID nationally?
it's a mixed bag. When the former leader said or asked if there's a way that we could inject bleach, that was an embarrassment. I mean, waking up every morning and reading on Twitter before the pandemic what moronic things the president said before a global pandemic, and then we have a global pandemic, and he downplayed it, said it was going to go away by Easter, said it was going to go away by X, Y, and Z. It was pretty bad. I think if we would have had a president, if we would have had leadership of the country that believed in science, I don't think it would have been as bad. I do appreciate that he sped up the vaccine research. That's really important. I don't know how much credit should go to the last president, but that did happen. But the fact that he wouldn't tell people he got vaccinated until it was leaked through one of the newspapers, what does that tell you? And so I think the government could have done a lot better. I think they could have done more. But because of who the last president was and because of his moronic views, it was a disaster.
Okay. And so I know you're a city planner, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so how did COVID impact your work as a city planner aside from your volunteering and your other organizations?
Well, like I said, before the pandemic, there was no telecommuting. And so we started telecommute. But it 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 was hard. It was a steep learning curve for me as well because I would have to work from home and city work doesn't stop. Community work doesn't stop. People still have questions about their fence. People still have questions about can they build a garage. Developers are still asking questions about X, Y, and Z. City council members are still expecting things to be done. And so I was very, and I am very thankful that my supervisor, the director of the department I'm in, she was very understanding. She's pro science, and she did a phenomenal job leading our department. Um, and there were people in the office that didn't believe in it, and so the whole idea of masks having been worn, that shouldn't have been an issue for anybody. But as a planner, the world didn't stop. The world didn't end. Planning and economic development and community development still had to happen and still was happening.
Yeah, so how did you feel about the masks or how do you feel about the restriction that has just been lifted?
Yeah, I still wear my mask at work. Not when I'm in my office by myself, but just because I'm around other people. And part of it is comfort, and is like a security blanket, and part of it is a statement. Like, I believe this is real, and even though I've had the vaccine since October, I still want to show people, coworkers, that I am taking COVID seriously. Um, and I never had an issue wearing a mask. If me wearing a mask protects other people and protects myself, I'm going to do it. That's simple. Our kids never had issues wearing masks. And now that the mask mandate is lifted, I have mixed feelings about it, because the anti-vaxxers, the deniers, the COVID deniers, they're not going to wear a mask anyway. And so now, when you're at Walmart, or you're at Target, or you're at Costco, and you see someone not wearing a mask, you're like, do you believe in science, or do you not? And that puts you in an interesting place as a person. Is, are you judging them? Should you be judging them? Well, I am. So this is where we are.
It's pretty cutthroat, and you know, but so I know you're involved in the community a lot. I don't know if this relates to you, but did you have or did you see any new worries in the Latino community regarding like documentation status?
Um, yes. I mean, yeah. Especially if they worked at a meat packing plant, and they were told that they had to work, and the plants, well, excuse me, and the plants weren't doing the safety precautions. I mean, you hear the plant in Waterloo where one of the plant managers started a pool on who would get sick. You know, when things like that happen, your employees do not feel comfortable being sick or taking time off, because they know you think they're expendable. And so I think the pandemic highlighted how much meat processing, meat packing thinks that Latinos are expendable.
That's a great point. Yeah. I know a bunch of my family works at the Perry Tyson meatpacking plant. They were still going to work when there was COVID cases at the beginning, and it was a mess.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking.
So, did COVID impact your ability to financially contribute to your family, or maybe send money to family that outside of the United States during that time?
It didn't. We were really fortunate in that we were both still working.
That's great. So, I have some other random questions, but how, if at all, have the current social movements in conjunction with COVID-19 impacted your daily life? Like, you talked about it a little bit, but like, kind of like the non-maskers, the non-vacciners, like all that COVID stuff.
You were breaking up. I
Oh,
did not hear much of
sorry.
that question.
So, how did the current, I don't know if they're current still, I'd say they're still current, but they were in full swing during COVID. How did the social movements in conjunction with COVID-19 impact your life, your daily life?
Uh, I remember after George Floyd's murder, um, BLM, Black Lives Matters, has been around for a long, long time, and they've been doing the work. And after George Floyd, white people started to take it serious. Uh, I remember hearing in history class in high school that people didn't care about civil rights. White people didn't care about civil rights until they saw the kids getting dogs sicked on them by the police, by getting water sprayed on them, by the TV cameras filming that on the peaceful marches. And that was a watershed moment. And George Floyd was a watershed moment for most of the country, especially whites. And so you see them seeing this as an actual issue, and not something that we're just complaining about. Oh, I'm not just getting randomly pulled over and asked if I have drugs or guns in the car. Um, no, these things are really happening. And so at rallies and protests, I would see white kids, I would see owls, old white ladies, I see people that you wouldn't have seen there a year before, 2 years before. And I don't know how I feel about that. You know, one man died, was murdered, and now some of these moderates are thinking, oh, this is an issue. And part of me thinks, oh, it's good that they're here. And part of me thinks, well, why did this heinous crime have to happen for you to get it? Um, we always take our kids to any political event, anything that I go to, and they're not in school or they've got time, they'll go to. And at some of the protests and rallies, I told my wife, like, we don't need to take pictures. Like, no one, we're not here for the social media clout. We're not here so people know that we're good people. We're here because we believe in it. I was fortunate enough to be a part of a press conference for the Latino reply of George Floyd, and my whole point was in this isn't about us. This is about being a good ally to other communities when they need us.
100%. Yes. So did COVID impact your decision to participate in those protests in 2020?
We were a little worried, but we were wearing masks. They were outside, and so it was one of those things that if I were to get COVID somewhere, I'd be okay with it at a BLM rally.
That should be a quote. Um, so we're to the last question. I want to before I stop recording. Is there anything else you would like to share with me or the world about your experience with COVID-19 that I have not asked you about?
I don't know. I mean, I think I've gotten on all my soapboxes that I can. I think it's so important that people realize what different communities go through. And if you've got family members who work at a meatpacking plant, their stories need to be told. If you've got family members who work in any essential job, their stories need to be told. You can hear from people like me as much as you want, but I think the true story of the past year is the resilience of the community. Um, and I don't know if you've seen the In the Heights movie, but I just laughed because one of the characters says, we've survived slave ships, we've survived conquistadors. The Latino people have survived so much, and this is just one more thing.
Mm-hmm. And we just need to make sure we start the individual stories. I feel like that really pieces together everything that was going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, Caleb, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. What you said, everything you said was amazing. It gave me so many different types of perspectives. But I want to thank you again for being a part of this project.
No, thank you for doing this and taking this on. Good.
Alrighty. I'm gonna stop recording. Then I'm gonna talk to you a little bit.